Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
The US is warning that it will impose new sanctions on Iran in the coming days. The reason for this is fairly straightforward, the missile attack that we saw over the weekend. The Europeans may follow. So that's kind of one element that we need to factor in. The other one is what is happening with Ukraine, where Ukraine feels like it's on the back foot right now. And that funding story is going to be very much front and center when it comes to today's meeting of G7 finance ministers. So they're meeting as well. They're trying to figure out, particularly here in Europe, how they fund this next stage of military expansion, industrial military expansion. And that obviously takes us to the conference that is taking place in Brussels. Ollie Crook is there for us. This is a big defense conference. We're trying to kind of get a read therefore out of this as to how quickly that process is going to unfold. Ollie, maybe you can help us with that.
Yeah, absolutely, Guy. As you mentioned, I mean, listen, there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of talking from politicians in Brussels about getting this defense capacity up and getting sort of all of this money that is required to the defense industry. But then there's this other component, right, which is getting those volumes and that capacity up. And someone who needs to figure out the mechanics of from the financing to the manufacturing is the person sitting right in front of me, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Saab, who joins us now for a conversation here at the Defense and Security Summit in Brussels. So I just want to start with the sort of latest developments that we saw from Iran and Israel and the attacks. Do you think that that is going to encourage even more spending? Do you think it changes things in the defense industry, or is this more of the kind of story that we've been seeing unfold?
Well, I think it's the political focus on what sort of where the threat environment is in the world will, of course, change a bit. And I'm more worried that the focus on the war in Ukraine will sort of disappear a bit, and that wouldn't be good. I think all tensions, all threat environments, the geopolitical tensions that happens now will drive defense spending, definitely. It's hard to say whether this sort of what's happening in the Middle East now, in the end, will get even more defense spending happening. But I think right now it's more like the focus on Ukraine versus the Middle East is worrying me.
And you see that shifting the balance?
Yeah, I think all of us see that, and the attention to Ukraine is not sort of that high anymore.
And it's hard to get exact figures on this, but I saw some reporting saying that, you know, much has been made as Israel's very successfully shooting down these 300 drones and missiles. The cost approximate associated with that was sort of $600 million in some of the reporting I saw. That's $2 million per drone. The economics of that, if you have a prolonged conflict, doesn't really work out. As a defense company, how do you think about this? How do you solve that problem?
I think all of us are figuring out ways to do this in a more efficient way. Being more agnostic in what kind of effectors you will use depending on the threat as such. I mean, hypersonic threats, you have to use your best capabilities to take them out, and then the more slower drones, you can do other things. If you have all sort of the measures to use, there will be new ways of doing that. But you have to think about what these things are aiming for also. So, I mean, you have to take them out with the systems you have. But over time, this will change, I think. It will become more efficient. And we're all putting research into this.
And so Europe is also, you leaders are here to talk about European competitiveness. That obviously plays very much into sort of the defense sector in the world that you're dealing with. What do you think the biggest impediments are to European competitiveness in defense that policymakers can address right now?
Well, I think in Europe, we have had a tendency of doing research programs for long-term capabilities, and when it comes to sort of manufacturing and industrializing this, we buy outside EU. Right. Which is kind of crazy when you think about the return on investment. So of course, I see the balance is wrong. I mean, Europe has to sort of put up industrial capacity also from the research we're doing, and not buying so much outside Europe. I'm not trying to protect sort of my own company or anything. We need competitiveness for sure, but we have to have the whole life cycle of things also with capacity in Europe. That would increase competitiveness.
And how do you get there? Because this is traditionally a very low volume industry, now demanding extremely high volume. So what are the kind of roadblocks for you, and how do you get that volume up?
I think from an industrial perspective, we've invested a lot, but I think for many governments, we need to have long-term commitments. I mean, the big investments we need to do in setting up a new site, a new facility, a new production, creating a supply chain that comes with that to support higher volumes, that is kind of huge investments. And without knowing that this is long-term and we will not fall below a critical mass again, in sort of industry is hesitating. So that's what's needed. You actually need the money in funds to use and incentivize companies to work together to do that. And that could happen if you put enough money into it.
And in the question of sort of supply chains, materials, but also sort of suppliers, I've spoken to some other defense contractors that are saying that basically if you really want to ramp up capacity, you're going to have internal competition between industries for material, whether it's auto industry or other industrial sectors. Do you see that happening, and do governments then need to step in and say, hey, listen, we need to prioritize defense?
I think I've been speaking to some companies providing us with components, and when they realize that we have a really important purpose of delivering things to support Ukraine, for example, it actually changed their priorities. Whether you need politicians to do that or not, that comes down to, I think, how capable are we of generating the systems needed to sort of counter the threat. In the end, there has to be prioritization if you don't have enough material. So that could happen, but right now I think industry leaders are talking to other companies to try and convince them about that. We don't need the sort of the volumes, but we need enough to be able to support Ukraine in the end. And that makes a difference.
And what within the industry, this is sort of a question that I have, if we have to have more efficiency, and Europe is talking about kind of joint procurement and really caring less about sort of competition in the traditional sense, whereas say, hey, we're okay with Saab basically owning a certain part of the defense sector. Do you think there needs to be M&A and consolidation within the defense industry? What does that look like in the next few years?
I mean, Europe is not sort of a federal level that can decide how things can be done top down from...
But there have been sort of concessions made on anti-competition, for example, in the defense industry.
I think continue to incentivize sort of companies to work together. If you find a couple or three countries working together, you find defense forces needed the same things, and then you will see industries coming together to work as well. That will lead to joint ventures, that will lead eventually to consolidation. You have to do it that way, I think, then rather than trying to sort of top-down decide who will do what in Europe. That won't be possible, I think.
And then in terms of these sort of valuations, because we saw, I think last week it was a huge move in the defense stocks. Are you a little bit concerned about how quickly things have gone, and that maybe, again, volumes and the financing may not all be there, and what kind of that means?
I don't sort of look at sort of the valuation of the company or the companies. I look more at what do we need to do to increase capabilities and capacity. Financing and attracting capital is really, really important. And still, there's a little bit of window dressing when it comes to who is prepared to invest in defense companies. It has changed a lot, yes. But, I mean, you have European investment banks still saying that it has to be dual use. You can't invest in defense capabilities or defense research. And if they change their mind, if the finance ministers in the EU will change their mind, that will send signals to the bigger investors as well, pension funds and others. That will be really, really important.
And so that's a good signal. But where do you think the bulk of the investment will come if sort of the cloud's cleared? And where do you expect most of that money to come from?
I think it will have to be... it will be private equity companies, there will be pension funds doing this, there will be big consortiums doing it, investor companies like the Wallenberg family investor company in Sweden. It will be a mix. But you need the big ones in play to sort of really attracting the capital to do the investment. And
in Sweden finally sort of recently joining NATO, is that changing kind of how you're positioning yourself in strategy, or is that just a demand volume story? Is that changing how you're going about?
No, I think it's changing our strategy a bit because, I mean, we need to get involved in the more sensitive stuff that NATO is doing in terms of capability development. So absolutely, we couldn't access that before.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Micael Johansson, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Saab, joining us here at the conference in Brussels for Security and Defense within Europe, and really putting some sort of numbers and the reality around the conversation that's happening not too far from here between EU leaders in the next couple of days.